Live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts right now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, what better way to start a day than on a spectacular yet super stacked Sunday here this morning. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show with your one and only host, Snake Silva, wherever and however you may be watching. You're live in the 702 iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram. Those are the social medias that you can like, follow, subscribe, and hit the bell button for all latest notifications on future and past shows. 2-hour show today. We are completely stacked. 3 interviews all together. Ingraven from Ingravenvids is joining me as well, along with Connor Newcomb of Locked On Orioles, and Ryan Finkelstein on Locked On Nets is going to be joining me. We are so stacked on a 2-hour show. And by the way, nothing could get more dramatic than that, than watching a little bit of, the Celtics and the Lakers rivalry. What a game that was. But ultimately, it was the same old stuff. The Lakers are just, they catch you on with a lead, and then all of a sudden things start to spiral out of control. We know with as far as, was it the foul or was it not really a foul? It just was, it was an unbelievable game. But still, you could tell by the young pedigree how good these young NBA players are starting to play at this level. And I think, the Celtics, really, really good team. They got a lot to play for. I thought it was a great game last night. So I definitely want to talk about this. So we'll bring in Ingraven here in about a couple minutes. So first of all, we got Super Sunday with the NFL Championship weekend. And I mean, it's going to be stacked, and it's going to be fun. On both sides, you've got the Bengals and the Chiefs. And on the other, you have the Eagles and the Niners. So talking about yesterday with as far as how good these Bengals have been. Now, the AFC North is going to be interesting to keep your eye on during the offseason. So I look at a bunch of teams. First of all, Pittsburgh, they're getting themselves a break. Why? Because Kenny Pickett is finally here. I think in the last second half of the stretch, Kenny Pickett has actually thrown really, really well. So the Steelers know they have a quarterback that they can trust and rely with the offense. What do they need to do better? They got to get themselves a healthy offensive line. Things weren't working well from there. And Kenny Pickett didn't have time to throw majority of the time. Not to mention this running back controversy between Jalen Samuels and Najee Harris. Watch when Pittsburgh gets an offensive line. Then we wouldn't even have this discussion about, is Najee Harris really a good running back or not? We wouldn't have this discussion. You would have the right guys that would open up the holes, get the run game to start, and then in the end, it's not like they don't have a pedigree of really good offensive players. I mean, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, these guys are going to be lights out all the way through next season. So that's why the Steelers, it's interesting, and they're not paying Kenny Pickett anything. So you have, at the very least, a good 2-year break until the contract extension talk starts to happen. So, and what did they always do well? They got a really good defense. They know that they could definitely rely on that defense. One thing to note about the Cleveland Browns, because, the whole Deshaun Watson thing, they paid him X amount of money, traded him, and he sat out all the way until week 12. So, and the Browns didn't seem like that this offense was really clicking up at the time. And I knew it, because first of all, it's really, really hard to pick yourself up after being a year off in the NFL. You have to learn the playbook. You got to learn every single one of the players all around you. What are their strengths? What do they struggle at? And Kevin Stefanski, nobody's even talking about him potentially being in the hot seat. I don't think he is. I think Kevin Stefanski, after watching him the last couple of years, he's been working this with Deshaun Watson. He's been working with this with Jacoby Brissett, and he worked with this with Baker Mayfield. But the identity is they are a fierce run team when Nick Chubb is running the football efficiently. And they also had Kareem Hunt. Now Kareem Hunt is a free agent. I don't know if he'll stay long for Cleveland. He might be looking for a starting job elsewhere. He's a very efficient runner. And the defense for Cleveland, we know it took at least a bit of a hit, but I think they might pick themselves back up. So Cleveland may be in the mix, but it's going to be interesting to determine that. Cincinnati, Joe Burrow, unbelievable franchise quarterback. Zach Taylor, I think, honestly needs to deserve the credit because of the way the offense has flown. It was shaky in the first couple games of the season, but then they got back to themselves like they did once they went to the Super Bowl last year. I had the pleasure of having the interview with Zach Taylor, and I think he's a great guy. I think he's very smart. I think he really has come a long way, even being in Sean McVay's tree. That I think, in the first time, once they got Joe Burrow, I know a lot of people are like, I don't know if he could coach. Well, last year he made to the Super Bowl, and this year he's got the potential of doing it again against Kansas City. And people don't realize, look at the pedigree they have. Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins. There is so much to like about Cincinnati. And they also upgraded their offensive line. So the run game feels efficient. Now, I know they're without their 2 offensive linemen this weekend, but it didn't stop Cincinnati from getting into the Super Bowl. And I think part of that is you look at Joe, and he's not that uncomfortable in the pocket with his personality, with his kind of character trait, and how he really calms himself in the pocket and makes efficient throws is what makes it a difference maker. Which brings me into this topic. So the Baltimore Ravens, for years and years and years, I've always loved their defense. I mean, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Terrell Suggs. They had so many good pedigrees of defensive players. Offensively, there was only about a good chunk. I used to love watching Jamal Lewis run the football. And I thought he was an absolute just dynamite running the football. Then come to Willis McGahee, and then Ray Rice at the time, and then here we are with their run game with J.K. Dobbins. Now, Baltimore always seems to be explosive, and they always seem to show up when games matter, which is why the defense feels so elite. Now, here we are in this position, and as I've said before, and I'll say it again, if you don't extend Lamar Jackson, this is where this franchise becomes irrelevant. And I know this for a fact because you're not having a quarterback who's winning you 80% of your games, who's obviously opening up this offensive playbook and is making things work with no matter how much pressure is put on the offense. Oh, and by the way, Lamar Jackson can throw, if anybody had forgotten. Yes, he can make efficient throws. He can make it happen. To even if he had Hollywood Brown, he's got his reliable target, Mark Andrews, and all they're trying to do is make the wide receivers work with Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay. But these aren't top of the line guys, which is why I think it's interesting when going into the offseason. Now, they did extend Roquan Smith to 5 years, $100 million. Now, this only pushes more of what's going to happen now with Lamar. And Baltimore's got serious discussions to make. Because I'm not even sure how long and why they've held this long with as far as do you or do you not extend Lamar Jackson? Now, I know things are tough because of the fact of his mother is his agent, and he's obviously looking for something that is going to protect him, especially when it comes to injuries. And we know he's efficient in and out of the pocket. He's very elusive with his legs. And we know with quarterbacks that are in this league that utilize their legs a ton, sometimes, I mean, you look at what happened the past weekend with Josh Allen. He had to be relied on for the run game because the run game couldn't get started. And the offensive line could not get the capability to protect him, let alone support him. And then that way he can make the quality throws to either one of his top targets. But when you look at Lamar Jackson, and anything is possible at that point. But I loved their defensive pedigree with Marlon Humphrey, Patrick Queen, Roquan Smith, and several others on that front line. Now, I think they could use a couple added upgrades, but maybe they might address that in the draft. Who knows? But I think also, too, Kyle Hamilton, keep your eye on him because I do think he'll be a disruptor on the opposing side of the field. because he's also somebody that when I watched him up in college, he was a guy that was a big time distributor, always was known to punch in the football out of the guy's hands and to force out fumbles. So, and you've got your defense set, only maybe about a couple pieces. But in the end, you got to think about what's going to happen with the offense. I mean, I watched Tyler Huntley. I think he's a good kid. I think he's a quality backup. But like how I've mentioned about Jacoby Brissett and how I mentioned about several other quarterbacks in this league, they're only going to win you so many games. But are they really going to be the ones that are going to win you the games like Kansas City, like Buffalo, like Cincinnati, like Jacksonville, like a lot of these other teams in the AFC? Hell, once Pittsburgh gets themselves back up to where they need to be, you got to now go toe-to-toe twice a year against Pittsburgh, and they're getting a break with Kenny Pickett. So I think Baltimore, they got to do the right thing with this because I do love Lamar Jackson and I do love his play style. And I do think that he's very efficient as a quarterback, even as a runner. But they got to make this right. And in the last couple years, when it came to wide receivers, there has not been many. And I know when Baltimore had an efficient wide receiver core, it was at the time when they had Steve Smith Sr., they had Anquan Bolden, they had Jacoby Jones, they had several other really good wide receivers. And I remember the time when they ended up winning the Super Bowl in 2012. It made Joe Flacco absolutely ecstatic. So why can't we get back to this? Why can't we end up seeing this wide receiver core really thrive? That's what's going to be the ultimate test. I know what I'm getting with Lamar Jackson. I know what I'm getting with the run game. Run game's not always the issue because J.K. Dobbins, he'll be the everyday back. And then, of course, you got Gus Edwards, who's willing to be that situational back to bust through the opposing defensive lines and definitely get more first downs. But you got to make this right. So joining me to discussing a little more with the Baltimore Ravens, and he's a very good quality content creator. And as they know, Ingraven and known for Ingravenvids, he is joining me via the Global Satellite Network presented by StreamYard. So, I mean, it's like I said, I don't think we can paint a different picture than this because it has now been a couple of years. I've seen Lamar Jackson. He has made quality throws. He's efficient when he's in or out of the pocket, and he's winning 80% of the games. I mean, with what you're seeing with the organization, does it kind of feel like that there's something missing to this piece? I mean, have you seen anything in this organization where they're kind of stuttering a little bit with as far as do we or do we really not extend Lamar Jackson? What are you seeing with this organization?
Oh man, that's been stuff that we've been seeing for years. And again, thank you for having me on. With the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson, it's been a lack. That would probably be my best word to describe the whole situation. It's been a lack. There's been a lack of them providing for Lamar Jackson. There's been a lack of them investing in Lamar Jackson. And when I talk about investing, not even just financial wise, and we'll see how much they really want to invest in him this offseason, if they do or they don't, but really just talent wise around him. And even coaching wise too. Just to start off with coaching, the Ravens philosophy, it is a philosophy that they've had success with in the past, but that philosophy is very outdated and it hasn't gotten them any significant success recently. Of course, they had the Super Bowl that they won in the 2012 season, which was great, amazing. But it's been 10 years. It's been 10 years, and Ravens haven't even sniffed an AFC championship. That was with Flacco. That's with Lamar. And the thing with that is the Ravens have been so set in doing things their way. Like, hey, we're going to run the ball. We're going to run. That's the focus. Run the ball, and we're going to play some good defense. But the lack of emphasis that they've put into their passing game is shown. Mm-hmm. And it's shown a lot. And that trickles down from their schemes, and it trickles down to the lack of talent that they invest in at the receiver position. And it shows. It shows itself every single year. So that's something that this offseason, this is a huge offseason. This is probably one of the biggest off seasons in a really long time for the Baltimore Ravens because they have some very significant decisions to make. Obviously, everything is contingent on Lamar Jackson. Ravens, they don't have an offensive coordinator right now. They did say that he is going to possibly have some input on the next offensive coordinator. Then they turned around and said, "Oh, we'll keep him in the loop as far as who we get for the next offensive coordinator." So we'll see what happens with that. But then, even at the same time, when they hire their next offensive coordinator, it's not a sure thing that they're going to have Lamar signed by then. And I don't even really think that they will. And then on top of that, they've said they want to redo the wide receiver room. If I'm Lamar, I'm like, okay, I've been here 5 years and I've seen what you've done in the wide receiver room, which hasn't really been much of anything. So I wouldn't even sign a deal until they actually really show me like, all right, we really going to really invest in that position. So it's a waiting game right now. It's a waiting game with Lamar Jackson. It's a waiting game with the Ravens. At their season-ending presser about a week and a half ago, they said all the right things. They talked about how they want to sign Lamar Jackson. They envision him being their quarterback of the future and whatnot, and that's great. But now let's see the action behind it, because actions speak a whole lot louder than any words ever could. So we'll see what the Ravens do when it comes to Lamar and really just this offense as a whole.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right with that. I mean, actions do speak a lot louder than words, because I say this all the time. I mean, everybody could spit out everything that people want to hear, but it's ultimately, do you get a deal done or not? Now, the only thing I anticipate is, because first of all, when I watched that Roquan Smith extension, I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, Lamar's not going to like this, because now they're kind of feeling like they're investing more in the defense. Which, here's the thing. How's that working in Chicago? They have butchered quarterbacks since like 1950s. They haven't had an efficient quarterback since Jim McMahon. And then here we are with Justin Fields. And all you got to get him is an offensive line, wide receivers, and some type of like trust system where Luke Getsy, I think, is a really good offensive coordinator. But it's like, you can't stick to this defensive game for long. Now, it is necessary when you need to have stops. But at the same time, we are such an offensive-centric league. Right. And my only thought is, because if they tried to slap, the franchise tag on Lamar Jackson, which that may be a possibility in the cards, even a franchise tag is pretty expensive. But I don't know, knowing Lamar, because, I'm 5 years into this thing. Do I really want to play on that franchise tag? And if that's the case, because I'll tell you, there was been a lot of talks, because Arizona right now, they are starting to really look for possible options for DeAndre Hopkins. And if I'm Lamar, it's like, if you're going to slap this wrist on me, why not go and get somebody like DeAndre Hopkins? Am I right?
Right. Yeah, that would and I wish they would have done that years ago, though, because that's been the most frustrating thing. It's like, it shouldn't have come to this point, to where we are now, and they should have invested in the wide receiver position so much more before, because they had plenty of opportunities to do it. They just didn't take them. And Lamar was before, obviously, from his rookie year and to where we are now. These last 5 years are really, and I really say these last 4 years, because he didn't start in his rookie year until later on in the season. Right. But these last 4 or 5 years, these are the cheapest that Lamar Jackson would ever be for the Baltimore Ravens, or really for anybody, for whether he remains a Baltimore Raven or not. This is the cheapest that Lamar is. So when you have a QB on a super cheap contract, on a rookie contract, you gotta take advantage, and they did not take advantage. So as far as what you were talking about with the franchise tag, I think it's definitely headed to a franchise tag. I don't think they're going to get a deal done before free agency starts. And I think the deadline to put the franchise tag on him would be like, I think it's the week before the week before free agency. That's when they can start putting the franchise tag on players. But I think, it's already been an ugly situation, but I think if they put the franchise tag on him, then it has the possibility to get even uglier. And I don't think he's going to want to play on a franchise tag at all, especially because it's like, all right, what more do I have to do? After what we've been through these past 5 years, what more do I have to prove? What more do I have to show you?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And here's the thing. It's not, this is not Dak Prescott we're dealing with here, because I know that, like, when people were thinking, It was disrespectful putting a franchise tag on Dak Prescott. But here's the thing. Now we saw the truth. Like, he cannot make the throw that normally Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert or Josh Allen or even Lamar Jackson would make in those plays. We know the truth about that. Now here, like with Lamar, yeah, that's one thing he's looking at is like, I don't think I want to be playing on this. I want to be getting a long-term deal because he's thinking about financial security. He's thinking about too his health security because if something was to happen to his legs, he's at the very least covered with the best insurance policy that he could get. And now, hypothetically speaking, now if this was a point where it really, really starts to boil up, which
Mhm.
it's been getting close to it, but I think the
Mhm.
Ravens, they know they have to get a deal done. But hypothetically speaking, if they cannot, is there a backup plan that they may potentially start to seek if all things fail?
I mean, I'm sure they've thought of all of the different scenarios because as a business, you have to think about both best and worst case scenarios. What their backup plan would be, no clue. Could it be Tyler Huntley? It could be that Tyler Huntley could serve as sort of a bridge until you draft that next quarterback, or if you end up feeling like you want to sign somebody in free agency. But that's been the thing with Lamar. That's we talked about it. It's been frustrating. You mentioned earlier about the Ravens and their focus on defense, and
Mhm.
I think with them being this defensive team, and obviously that was their bread and butter. With them being such a defensive team, though, I think when they got Lamar and they saw Lamar and they were like, "Oh wow, he can do all of this. Wow, this is great." I feel like they never fully knew what to do. Because you mentioned earlier how, with the Ravens, they've had all these nice players on defense, these Hall of Famers and whatnot, but on offense, it's just been a handful of guys. Because on offense, they haven't been an offensive team.
Yeah.
But something else that you were talking about too, it is an offensive league, and the Ravens they haven't taken advantage. Now I remember, and there's people that still question, oh, can Lamar throw the ball? I think that's silly, but it's people that still question it. And with the Ravens, to me, is and I've been saying this for years too. It doesn't seem like they trust him. It doesn't seem like they trust him. It doesn't seem like they fully believe in him.
Mhm.
And my thing was, and that actually still is, even though it's too late now. But my thing is, all right, if you have Lamar Jackson, and if you don't fully believe in him as a quarterback, you don't fully believe in his arm, you don't fully believe he can make every single throw, why don't you put him in a situation to where it's like, all right, he doesn't have any excuses at all. Josh Allen, rookie year, didn't look good. They questioned him. They were like, man, this guy is he really gonna be a quarterback of the future?
Mm.
They went and got him Stephon Diggs, changed everything. Tua, who there continue to be questions about. I mean, Dolphins were trying to get Deshaun Watson and all. They were trying to move off of Tua. But then what do? They drafted Jalen Waddle. He did his thing. But then they went and got Tyreek Hill. And if it weren't for the concussions and everything, Tua had been doing really good. He'd been
And
having a
another
good
thing
season.
too, they got Mike McDaniel, offensive-minded coach, because
That's
here's the
true.
thing, Brian Flores, I think he'll get a head coaching job. I have a feeling he'll be with the Cardinals because the Cardinals,
Mm,
they need an alpha male that's in there that could put his boot
mm,
down, get
yeah.
Kyler Murray to really, really shape himself up. But yeah, offensive coach, they opened the play design and it worked toward Tua's strengths.
That's true. That's true. And then you remember, I think it was last year, Jalen Hurts. Oh,
Yep.
it was rough, especially the playoff game against the Bucks. It looked so bad. He looked bad. But then
Mhm.
what did they do? They had questions about him. They obviously had drafted Devontae Smith last year, but then this past offseason, they go out and get AJ Brown, and that Jalen Hurts in the conversation for MVP.
Yep.
So it's like that's what happens when you really invest around your quarterback. You get the answers to those questions. But the Ravens, they never did it like that. They had the opportunities to, but they never did it like that. And now we're here.
Yeah, and it is interesting, and here's the funny thing. I mean, I've been watching football ever since I was a kid, and I remember
Mhm.
watching those years where I was around at the time when Baltimore they had Derek Mason, they had Mark Clayton, they had a
Yeah.
lot of these guys, and then watching Jamal Lewis running the football,
Yeah.
and all the way to Willis McGahee. I mean,
Mm.
but here's the funny thing, and this has always been their battle cry. They never gave up on any play of
Mhm.
any game at all. Like, they're just the kind that you could beat them through the trenches, but they're the kinds that they will respond back offensively, defensively, whatever the case may be. I think that's something that's always stemmed with this franchise ever since they became a franchise since day one, right?
Yeah, they're not gonna just like lay down, and that's one thing that is very commendable about the Baltimore Ravens. Even I remember last year when Lamar was out, a lot of people wrote the Ravens off, and yeah, they did lose every game when he was out last year, but they didn't get beat down. They were in every game like down to the very end, and then even this year. This year, I think they were more prepared for the Tyler Huntley. He had more experience. So when Lamar went down this year, when he went out this year, they did do better than they had done the previous year. And they were in their games. And that's the thing. Ravens, it's like with them, they kind of feed off the underdog role. But when they're favorites, it seemed like sometimes they may not know how to handle it so much.
Right.
But they do not lay down. Which is great, and they do not just give up. But they've been stuck. They've been stuck in a weird place for a while to where they are competitive. They're a competitive team. They haven't been a bad team, but they haven't been contenders. So it's time for it. I mean, they haven't done everything they could possibly have done to get to that contender level. So again, this offseason is just huge on so many different levels.
Oh yeah, and I truly feel like that the Ravens, they're going to figure this out one way or another. And from what you're seeing right now with the possibilities of the off season right now, and um I know that they're like all of us in life and in business, we hate to make the crucial move that we know is either going to benefit us or we have to now hit the reset button and start over again to make it work. Um Now the Ravens have an interesting offseason yet, a draft as well. So if there are possibilities, if they can't get certain things done in the offseason, walking into the draft, what could be some possibilities that if they can't get anybody in the offseason, is there some pieces that they should evaluate looking into maybe wide receiver positions, maybe some defensive pieces that they got to stay younger to kind of keep the pedigree going? Um, how do the Ravens really approach the draft here this year? Because I think this is going to be really interesting to watch them.
Yeah, that's why I do think with whatever's getting ready to happen with Lamar, is going to have to be decided before the draft because he changes everything. He changes everything with how you move, how you operate, with what you can and can't do. If he's there, then you'll have less draft picks. If he's not there, then you'll obviously have more draft picks and a higher draft pick. So much is contingent based off of what happens with him. So that means they have to get whatever's going to happen. They got to get it figured out before the end of April, because that's obviously when the draft is, because that's going to change. Because if Lamar's there, you're not looking for a quarterback. If Lamar's signed, you're obviously not looking for a quarterback. And you're making some different moves, possibly at the receiver position. You could possibly make a trade, or you can go through free agency, whatever. But if Lamar is gone, then all right, well, now you're looking for a quarterback. Do you like somebody in this draft, or do you not like the guy so much in this draft? Do you feel like you really are going to still be competitive this year? Do you feel like you can still be contenders this year, or are you going to just take this as sort of a rebuild? So much could change. But then, like you mentioned too, whether Lamar Jackson is with the Ravens or not, they still have the aging defensive players like a Calais Campbell. What's going to happen with him? Is he going to retire, or is he going to come back? With Justin Houston, another aging defensive player, is he going to retire? Is he going to come back? With Marcus Peters, is he going to re-sign, or is he going to go somewhere else in free agency? They're starting to get thin now at different positions. So they have so much work to do on both sides of the ball. So yeah, Eric DeCosta, Ravens GM, he's going to be busy, man.
Oh yeah, I can imagine his desk is going to be full with just possibilities of who are we retaining, who are we going to move off of, and do we have that cap expendability to where we can bring some new guys in, and at the same time, anything we have left, we go out and we finagle some moves to get some draft capital to get some guys. So lastly, couple things. One, the shape of this division. Now, I mentioned this earlier on the show. I mean, Pittsburgh's getting a break with Kenny Pickett, and I feel like they found their quarterback now post Ben Roethlisberger. All they got to do is they got to get an offensive line to give him time to throw. Najee Harris, this talk about the running back position. Look, he's going to be better next year, and then the defense always seems to be A+. Cleveland, they know they've got Deshaun Watson, was a little shaky, and I had a feeling this was going to look like this, but their defense is going to get healthier. Offensive line continues to excel, so they're going to look for some stuff. How competitive has this division now become, knowing that obviously we got the Bengals today, and they're on the radar, and then the possibilities of Cleveland and Pittsburgh. This has got to feel like this is now a spark for the Ravens. They got to keep up with this level of competition.
Exactly. That's true. Again, this offseason is so important. And another thing, too, with you mentioning Kenny Pickett, Deshaun Watson, and Joe Burrow, the other three AFC North teams, they have their quarterbacks for at least the next 3-4 years. They have their guys. But the Ravens, they don't know if they have their guy or not. So that right there, that's a possibility that could keep the Ravens afloat or possibly set the Ravens way back within the division alone. And that's where everything starts. You start building and crafting your football team to win in a division. And then, of course, outside of division too. So the Bengals right now, they've surpassed the Ravens. They have surpassed the Ravens because they, for 2 years straight, they are in line. They put themselves in a position to where they are competing to play in the Super Bowl for 2 years straight. And they have beat all the AFC big dogs. They beaten the Chiefs. They beaten the Bills. They beat the Raiders. They beat everybody. So it's like they don't have any fear of anybody, nor should they, because they've been handling their business. So whether they win or lose tonight, they've put themselves in a really, really good position, and they're set up for years to come. They've been doing an excellent job of just constructing that roster, both on offense and defense. Obviously, Joe Burrow, he's going to get paid. They ain't letting him go anywhere. So that's just a matter of time. This will be his first year. After this season is over, he'll be eligible for an extension. So whether it happens now, I think it'll be smart of them to make it happen now, or whether it happens later, we know that it's going to happen. With Deshaun Watson, he's obviously paid already. And the Browns, he obviously didn't even get to play the full season this year. Right. But next year, he'll be playing a full 17 games. So there's that. And Deshaun Watson is obviously a good quarterback as well. And, Browns are never scared, obviously, with them getting Deshaun Watson in the first place. But with so many other moves that they've made over the years, they're not scared to do crazy stuff, to go after, to make crazy scenarios happen and whatnot. They're not scared to do outlandish stuff to bring football players on their team. They're not scared of any of that. And then with the Steelers, the Steelers, things may have been a little bit quiet on them this season, but they fight. They fight. And I know it is technically true. I think sometimes it can get a little exaggerated, but it is technically true. With Mike Tomlin, he's never had the losing record. Yep. So hey, that does speak volumes. But that does basically show hey, Steelers ain't never gonna lay down. They got Mike Tomlin as their coach. They're never gonna lay down. So they're always there. And then again with the Ravens, they split with all three teams this year. There's obviously the competitiveness within the division already. So yeah, man, they just to stay afloat. This offseason, man, this is the craziest offseason in so long for the Ravens because the AFC North, people ain't messing around. They're not messing around, so it's gonna be tough.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I got my eye on that division, and I really do think that competition. I mean, I'm excited just to see what the Lions are going to be for AFC North games, and I can't wait to see how that really progresses. I mean, watching through the offseason, all throughout the draft, it's going to be something special. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, Ingraven. And where could people find you on social media for everything Baltimore Ravens?
Everything is Ingravenvids. That's Ingravenvids. That's YouTube. That's Twitter. That's Instagram. It's Facebook. It's everything. So it's Team Keep It Clean. So it's family-friendly content. So everybody's welcome to watch. And if it's for you, great. If it's not for you, that's fine too. I appreciate any time that you spend watching the channel. And thank you again for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. You're welcome on any time. And I absolutely love your content, man. Always keeping it A+ and real, man. And it's a pleasure having you up and on the show. And real quick, who you got today, man? Because I know everybody's got their picks, but it's tough. Who you got today?
Man, I wish I had a coin on me because I would just flip a coin. It's so tough because with both games, it's 49ers and Eagles. I'll go with the Eagles, and then with the Bengals and the Chiefs. Man, I know Bengals have had Chiefs number for a while. And it's like, man, last week I thought Bills were going to win it all. I thought Bills were going to win it all, but Bengals winning to Buffalo and beat up on the Bills. Man, can I say the Cincinnati Chiefs or the Kansas City Bengals? Can I pick them? I don't know, man. I'll go with the Chiefs, but it's like it's not a confident pick, man.
It's gonna be fun. It's situational play. It's so tough, but it's gonna be exciting all the way around.
Yeah, man. It's gonna be a fun game though. It should be good, man.
Yeah. All righty, Ingraven. Take care of yourself. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and we will definitely see you soon.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Not a problem. Well, yeah, great quality content stuff for Baltimore Ravens. But yeah, that offseason is going to be really interesting to watch. I can't wait to see it. So we're sticking with Baltimore, but on the other side of things, because of the fact that we're getting closer to spring training, we're going to be talking more and more about baseball. And the best one who's locked in on Baltimore, that's the Baltimore Orioles via the Global Satellite Network presented by StreamYard. Connor Newcomb joining me. So I was really surprised about the way the Orioles really carried themselves. So first and foremost, watching this team, they are obviously getting younger. They are getting younger in the pitching staff. They're getting younger in the lineup. But I am liking with what I have seen now from just this past season, even the season before. There's some promising pieces. And looking at it from Cedric Mullins to Adley Rutschman, and now Gunnar Henderson, #1 prospect in baseball. How big of a future now is this really looking like for the Baltimore Orioles moving forward? Because I think this could be a team that at some point when they get everything together and there's maturity, there's experience, this team could possibly shoot their way up into the postseason at some point, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at this team, this farm system, and you see that, you had a team bring up Adley Rutschman last year, former #1 prospect, former #1 overall pick, and he finishes second in Rookie of the Year voting. And honestly, if he doesn't get a tricep injury in spring training and miss the first 6 weeks of the season, he might finish above Julio Rodriguez and win that award last year. And then you look at the odds for Rookie of the Year this year in the American League, the top 2 guys are both Orioles. It's Gunnar Henderson, #1, and it's Grayson Rodriguez, the #2 pitching prospect in baseball, #2. And these guys are going to keep coming because, we had all these top 100 lists come out over the last week or so for prospects, and the Orioles had 8 players in each of those lists, and they were a different 8 players each time. They had 10 different players in those lists. Nobody had more than 8 in any of them. So these players are going to continue to come to the big leagues. And you mentioned Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson. I mean, Adley's already established himself. I think it's going to take a year or two before we're calling him the best catcher in baseball. I think JT Realmuto is the only guy you're going to be talking about in the conversation with Adley Rutschman. I think Gunnar Henderson showed that he might even have a higher ceiling just as a hitter than Rutschman does. And we only got to see a month of him in the big leagues at the end of the season last year. The pitching in the system is not what the hitting is at all. So they will have to address that at the major league level. But right now, I mean, the future is incredibly bright. And it's tough because the Orioles really haven't added this offseason a lot. But you can look down in the minor leagues and say they can add 4, 5, 6 talented players just from promotions at some point in 2023.
Yeah, and you got to think too, because I mean, Adley Rutschman's coming from, a pedigree to where they picked up where they left off of with Matt Wieters at the time. I thought he was a really good catcher as well, really good defensively. And even, offensively, there were times where he could really pull through on certain situations. So I think watching Adley Rutschman and seeing the growth and the development, But by the way, I mean, one guy I can name in particular, Ryan Mountcastle. How good has that guy been in the last couple of years of development to where this guy's hitting homers, this guy's driving runs in? I mean, this guy kind of looks like he is really that brute force in that lineup that if I'm looking all around the AL East, I mean, I wouldn't even be wanting to be pitching around a guy like that.
Yeah, the Mountcastle situation is funny because it took him a little longer to get to the big leagues. A, because he was coming up when the Orioles were just right in the middle of a full-on tank. And the longer they held him in the minors, the longer he would be an Oriole once he got to the majors. But the other thing was, for years, the Orioles were trying to figure out where he was going to play defensively because he was drafted as a shortstop out of high school. But, that was all the way back in 2015. And back then, yeah, he was a shortstop, but as his, body started to develop, he started to hit more. They moved him to third and he couldn't really play there. So they moved him to second and it was a little iffy. So they moved him out to left field and right field and he couldn't really play there. And they even moved him to first, which is kind of like the last resort for guys. And he kind of struggled there. And the Orioles were just looking at him like, we love the bat, but can we call you up just to be a DH? And luckily for Mountcastle this year, he worked incredibly hard and became an above league average defensive first baseman. And that's all they need out of him when they can get what his bat gives. Now, his numbers were a little down this year from what they were in 2021, but a lot of that has to do with the Orioles moved the wall back, 30 feet in left field, made it a completely different ballpark for right-handed hitters, which Mountcastle is. And so some of his power numbers went down. He was also one of the least lucky hitters in all of baseball. His hard hit rates were sky high, hitting line drives at guys all day. His numbers are going to go back up in 2023, and he's a key part of this team. And I think what really makes the Orioles potentially dangerous in this lineup and what makes Mountcastle dangerous is since they called him up in 2020, he's basically hit third or fourth for this team in pretty much every lineup. With Rutschman and Henderson secured in the lineup, plus, your guys like Cedric Mullins and other guys who have continued to hit like Anthony Santander, Ryan Mountcastle is going to settle into like the 6 hole on this Orioles team with a lot less pressure, and he's going to get more pitches to hit because guys are going to want to pitch to Rutschman and Henderson. And I think that's going to make him really dangerous as some of the load is taken off his shoulders, and I expect a huge year for him this year.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at it, I mean, the AL East, it is something interesting because of the fact of Boston had a down year, and it just kind of seemed like they're unloading a lot of different pieces. So I don't know how they'll really pick themselves back up in 23. Look, I've been convinced with the Blue Jays, it's either all or nothing with them because it's like 1 minute they'll have all the potentials to really be a good team, and then they just pitching's not great. The offense can't seem to get rolling, and now it's like they lost their confidence. And the Rays, I think, have honestly been the most consistent team, in my opinion. Because every year there's always somebody different in pitching, but the pitching styles never changed. So I think the level of competition in the AL East, it is really interesting. I mean, you're coming off a year where Aaron Judge, he's an MVP. He, breaks the Yankee record with the most home runs. But for Baltimore, in the pitching aspect, I mean, they got to get things cooking at some point because I've always felt there was a lot of mediocrity when it came to, their pitching staff. I remember the time when they had Charles Tillman, they had Andrew Kashner, they had several other guys, but they couldn't get the guy. Is there, obviously you mentioned about one pitcher in the prospect, lineup of somebody that could really be impactful. Is there anybody else in this this pitching development in this farm system who could be a very, very promising factor for the Orioles in the future?
Yeah, so I mentioned the 8 top 100 prospects. So 2 of them are pitchers right now for the Orioles. One is Grayson Rodriguez, who is a top 10 prospect across the board. He's the number 2 pitching prospect in baseball, and he's ready to go. Now, he should have been in the big leagues last year. He was dominating AAA again. He got to June. Everyone was asking where he was. Then he comes down with a lat injury, and it was a pretty serious lat strain. He misses the rest of the year. And so while he probably should have been in the big leagues before the All-Star break last year, he never made his debut because of injury. Now, it's setting up for him to have a rotation spot on opening day, which is going to be great for the Orioles. He's got incredible stuff, throws in the high 90s with a fastball. I mean, his changeup is Pedro Martinez-like. They got him. DL Hall is the other guy in those prospect lists. Now, he did come to the big leagues late last year, left-hander who throws 99 with a wipeout slider. Command's been a little bit of an issue for him in his career, which you see a lot with lefties who throw that hard generally. And he came up, he made one start as his major league debut, and then he went to the bullpen. And the Orioles used him as a reliever. He actually got a save against the Yankees late in the year in Yankee Stadium. So he's got the stuff to, at the very worst, be an elite reliever. But the Orioles still think he could be a starter. So there's two of your options. Now, around those guys, you've got a lot of question marks, a lot of guys who could be good, could be okay, could flame out. You've got Kyle Bradish, who was a nice prospect and had a good year. You've got Dean Kramer, who ended up being the only thing useful they got when they traded Manny Machado. He had a good year last year in the rotation. They just traded for Cole Irvin from the Athletics, who in no way is an ace, but has made 30 solid starts the past 2 years with Oakland, and the O's could use that. They signed Kyle Gibson to be a veteran. But below that in the system, there's a lot of guys where there's still question marks. They've got pitchers like a guy like Drew Rom, who's kind of a left-hander who throws from different arm angles and is really interesting to watch. They got a guy in Noah Denoyer who was actually undrafted and has made it all the way onto the 40-man roster and has some really good stuff from the right side. So they've got some pitchers, even in the low minors as well, who are interesting, but none of them get the national attention, which is why I talk about, they're going to need to add major leaguers basically to this team. But Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall are here to stay. They are two elite pitching prospects. And I don't know what their roles are going to be this year because they haven't really pitched in the bigs. The O's are going to have some innings limits. They're both coming off of injuries. But when they get unleashed, the O's will at least have some sort of punch, whether it's two starters, one's a starter, one's a reliever, that are going to get a lot of guys out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that pitching staff really shapes up. And I mean, there's a bunch of real good, promising prospects that are right there that I think hopefully can shape up this rotation, because I know in the big leagues, I mean, anybody could literally expend themselves with the with the relief pitching, because it always just seems like now in this generation of baseball that relief pitching is literally like your baby. That's the one that they're playing with situational positions. And if they're getting out of certain places to where they're holding on to leads or they're giving themselves momentum, even if they're tied up or down by 1 or 2, they're at the very least getting them out of to where the offense is now back on. They could get themselves a couple hits, drive in some runs, and at the very least shift the momentum. So talking about that too. So Cole Irvin now fully acquired by the Baltimore Orioles. And I agree with you too. I don't see him being a full ace. I think he's more of like that 3, possibly 4 guy, like right in the middle, a middle battery for this this rotation. I myself, I don't show my fandom, but I am an A's fan, and I hate to see it where every single one of these players, you build them up, you trade them away. It's the same old spiel. And I'm hopefully waiting to see if they're going to be the Las Vegas A's, because let's be honest, there's really not a market in Oakland for them at all anymore, except out of Alameda, but that's it. But Cole Irvin, what do you see the projections right now as far as being that rotation guy and where he could literally be that stabilizing battery for the next guy, even if he jumps over above him, that he can help out with this rotation to be completely balanced?
Yeah, some of the talk about, the Orioles needing pitching is that the O's went into the offseason with nobody on their roster in terms of starting pitchers who had thrown a full major league season. Even the guys who were returning from last year's rotation either had significant injuries where they missed 2 months, or they maybe joined the rotation at the end of the year, or, in Jordan Lyles' case, the one veteran became a free agent and the Orioles didn't re-sign him. So they went into the offseason with nobody, basically no adults in the room for their starting rotation. Now they signed Kyle Gibson, who at this point is 35. He's a number 5 starter, but he throws, 30 starts every year. He throws 170 plus innings, and he's thrown full major league seasons. So that was nice to have at the end. And what Cole Irvin gives you is the same thing, but a little more moldability, because Cole Irvin is 28 instead of 35. And instead of Kyle Gibson, who you signed to a 1-year deal, and, he could be retired 2 years from now, like he's probably only going to pitch for the Orioles for 1 year. Right. Cole Irvin has 4 years of team control left on his contract. So the Orioles are going to make a few tweaks, probably have him throw his sinker less, throw his four-seam fastball and his curveball a little bit more, and they get him for 4 seasons. And even if he gives you 4 seasons of basically what he gave to the A's, which is 30 starts, 180 innings, an ERA just around 4, if you slot that into 4 or 5 in your rotation for the next 4 years, you feel really good about that because Irvin's a guy who has pitched 2 full big league seasons, a left-hander, which the Orioles really didn't have in the rotation before making that trade. And those are always important as well to at least switch things up in your rotation a bit. You don't generally want to have 5 right-handers in there. And he's been around a really bad team. And to be honest with you, like, his numbers were really bad in September and October last year.
Mm-hmm.
When you're playing for a team in September that has 45 wins, it can't be easy to pitch your best at the end of a long season. I can imagine coming to Baltimore when things are looking a little better in terms of outlook, that maybe he can sustain how he pitched for 3 months for the final month and a half of the season. And maybe that gives him a little boost. And the big wall in left field, he's had a home run problem in his career. A lot less homers being hit at Camden Yards now because of moving that wall back. So he's never going to come out and, give you 8 scoreless innings, 3 starts in a row. But he's going to be a guy who can stabilize your rotation. He can save your bullpen. And he's a nice piece to add on. Would I have liked the Orioles to get a real ace this offseason? Yes. I said it time and time again on my podcast. But they didn't do it. They ended up with 5 or 6 guys who are solid enough. There's not really a weak link. There's just not that strong link in this rotation. So it's kind of an interesting approach they're taking. And we'll see how it works. But at the end of the day, they didn't give up much. And you get a guy for 4 years who's been pretty solid.
And his contract is inexpensive too.
Yes.
So that's where you can really thank the A's for that. Because, ultimately, they're tight on the payroll. But, that's an added plus to where now you could maybe potentially get other guys that can help to surplus, this rotation as well in the end.
If you're worried about the money, you don't even really have to worry about it for 4 years because he's inexpensive for 4 years. And if it doesn't work out, you move him to the bullpen, you trade him again, you send him to AAA. The Orioles are worried about payroll, but he's not taking a chunk of it at all.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a perfect and ideal position that the Baltimore Orioles want to be in. So, so with all these young kids, with Ryan Mountcastle, Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, and Anthony Santander, another one that I would like to add too, that I'd like your thought on, who I think he'll be real special when he gets to the big league levels, is Jackson Holliday. That kid, watching him, and obviously coming from a pedigree from his dad, who was a big-time power hitter. We loved watching him play from Colorado to the A's to St. Louis. How big of an impact could Jackson Holliday really be when this is all completely set, where the momentum, it's getting younger, it's getting set? He's going to be fitting in beautifully with the future of this Orioles team.
Yeah, and if things go well, we're not going to see him in the big leagues this year, honestly. He's 19 years old, but if he's as good as the O's think he's going to be, like 2024 at some point, you could see Holliday in the big leagues. And that's kind of unprecedented for a guy drafted out of high school just 2 years prior. And that could happen in 2024. The Orioles had a lot of choices with the number 1 pick. There were 5 or 6 names thrown around, and there's never any kind of leaks at all out of the Orioles system. You generally get a little more leak about who's going number 1 in any MLB draft, just because that sets off a chain reaction in baseball, sometimes more so than it does in other sports in the draft. But there was never anything coming out. There were 5 or 6 names, and it turned out to be Jackson Holliday. And having his dad be Matt Holliday is great, and he was such a good big leaguer. But Jackson is his own player. Jackson is a left-handed hitter. Jackson's an infielder, while Matt was an outfielder. Jackson is a different kind of hitter as well. Jackson is known, for his power, somewhat like his dad was, but also for his batter's eye. And the guy gets to the minor leagues and everyone's like, he's 18, he played a high school season. We'll send him to rookie ball in Florida. We'll let him live in Florida for 3 weeks, play some professional baseball, play against, guys that he's way better than, get some confidence and go home. He was so good in a week down there that they said this isn't even beneficial to him because he's so much better than his competition. So they moved him up to full season ball in single A for the final 3 weeks of the season because they were just like, this is not benefiting him whatsoever. Yeah. And then all he did was, I believe, almost double the amount of walks that he had to strikeouts and hit over 300 and use all the fields and honestly dominate that level. And so what that tells me is he's going to be in Double A at some point this season, which puts him on a track to get to the big leagues at some point in 2024. And, it's interesting because the Orioles have a lot of good infield prospects, including Gunnar Henderson, who plays the same position at shortstop. But if Holliday is what they think he's going to be, they're going to find room for him. He's going to be on the big league roster in a couple of years here. And I think he just gives you another weapon. And it's hard to see like what the ceiling's going to be and imagine it because he's only 19. He's kind of a smaller kid coming out of high school. And you look at him and you say, some guys get drafted and you're like, yeah, he's 18, but you can see like, the body is already really maturing. For Jackson Holliday, it's almost like, yeah, he looks 18. But then you look what he does on the baseball field and you're like, imagine when he gets in a professional weight room and works with professional hitting coaches.
Yep.
It's going to be fun to watch. And I think just seeing him in the minors this year is going to be fun to see how many levels he can dominate at such a young age. Gunnar Henderson had a very similar rise that I think Holliday could have, where Gunnar was 19 years old in single A. And then all of a sudden at the end of the year, he was, dominating double A and he had just turned 20. And it happened like that. And I think Holliday could do that too, which if he's in the big leagues in 2024, I mean, the O's are almost ahead of schedule at that point. And, you start thinking more than just, are we, maybe a wild card contender? And maybe that helps if he gets to the big leagues. The O's are just like, our number one pick is here early. Maybe let's spend a little money and add to him too. And maybe that makes the team look a little bit better.
Yeah, and at the same time, too, you start to set yourselves up for where it's a stacked lineup. It's set to where it really balances out. I've always said this about, with the pitching staff to the lineups, if you have it balanced to the point where you're getting guys on base, you're like, to me, home runs are honestly nothing to me. Like when you need it, you need it. But if you're driving in gaps and you're driving in those runs, that's the part where if your scoring possibilities are as higher than a lot of these other competition teams, like the Padres, the Dodgers, the Braves, and then you're kind of you're trending in the right direction to where you're a team nobody should even look past. So in watching that, yeah, I think Jackson Holliday's got some really good stuff up on him, and yeah, different build. I kind of see him more as not really like a slap ball hitter, but he's the kind that, when you need him to get on base, he's going to get it. And if you need him where he could strive for the gap, he's going to get it. So I think watching that and then seeing him be that part where he could juice up, he could be a potential 1 or 2 in that lineup. And I think he could really strive it to where guys like Mountcastle, Santander, and all of them could now start to strive up for power. So I think it'll be interesting to watching the Orioles and their future, but I'm excited of it because I said to people, I'm like, look, you could laugh at the Orioles all you want, but at least they're not setting themselves up like how Oakland or Miami or some of these other teams, they're still trying to figure themselves out. Like, what do we really have? At least Orioles, they know. Like, look, the Chris Davis contract, I get it. I know it was embarrassing, and I know it was, something they have to obviously swallow that money. But these kids, they're looking like this is going to be really interesting for the next 3, possibly 4 years ahead. And I think they'll be right in the driver's seat by then. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. But I appreciate you, Connor. Thank you so much for coming up on here into the show. And where can people find you for everything Baltimore Orioles?
Yeah, check us out at Locked On Orioles on Twitter, and then Locked On Orioles is the podcast name wherever you get your pods, and we're on YouTube as well. Make sure to go subscribe, but we're still doing 3 pods a week here in the offseason, but once spring training starts sometime in late February, 5 days a week, Locked On Orioles audio and YouTube as well to check out everything you need to know about the O's.
Oh, I love it, man. And you know what? This is always my favorite time of year because now for me, my birthday's in March, and I love it because spring training is right there. And I love it the time when, football season closes, but baseball season, I'm locked in on it like all throughout the year. And I can't wait to see different stories, different prospects come up, be successful. And I mean, this baseball season, the way it's shaping, is going to be really interesting to find out. But thank you so much for joining me, man. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we will definitely see you on spring training and hopefully all throughout the season with everything the Orioles are doing. So catch yourself. We'll definitely catch you on your show for sure. And we'll definitely see you soon.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, folks, man, this has been a stacked day. Hour 2 coming up next live in Vegas. It's the Snake Sports Talk Show.
Live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts right now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with Hour 2 live in Las Vegas. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show, wherever and however you may be watching and listening. Live on iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram. All the social medias, like, follow it, subscribe, and hit the bell button to keep you up to date on future and past shows. What a crazy hour it was in the past hour, and I do thank Ingraven from Ingravenvids, Connor Newcomb of Locked On Orioles. Really appreciate both those guys. Those guys were absolutely A+. And it is going to be interesting, like I said before. I think evaluating the offseason, the draft, and what the possibilities are going to be for the NFL next season. Because, it's like I said yesterday, Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, they are going to be eligible for contract extensions. Now, the Bengals, they're catching a break because they're not paying Jamar Chase anything yet. T. Higgins is a possibility, but he's got one more year left. And then, you got Tyler Boyd and several others. So they're going to smartly do this thing to where Joe Burrow, he will be a Bengal for a long time. I think he has really set that standard in the culture to where the Bengals, they're no longer irrelevant. They're more of that tough team, even in the AFC North, where a lot of these teams, they're starting to build up. They are starting to gain a lot of momentum to where they are competitive teams as well. So I think this will be interesting to watching the Bengals. But as I've said before about the Chargers, they are a little bit, cap tight. So if they could, because it would be a mistake letting Justin Herbert walk. It would be an absolute mistake. So they've got to make some sacrifices from there because they got to open up the cap. They got to open up the paycheck. And hopefully, they will come to that deal where Justin Herbert can stay a Charger for a long time, because I don't think they're going to lose out on their quarterback at all. I think after finding him, after moving off of Phillip Rivers, and they have been known on the pedigree of having quarterbacks that have been in this organization. I mean, Dan Fouts all the way to Doug Flutie, Jim Harbaugh, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, and here we are with Justin Herbert. They have had pedigrees of quarterbacks that have come and gone from this organization, but long-time guys. This is where you really have to shape this up because, again, they made it into the playoffs. That's great, but they embarrassed themselves in the playoffs after giving up a 27-point lead. Part of that, I think, was the coaching staff along with Brandon Staley. So Staley, he's got a lot of pressure on his shoulders, but he's got to make the defense a lot better than what it was this past year and the year before. And you've got to allow Justin Herbert to control his game because he's got the arm. He's got everything in front of him to make it happen. So, I do love the fact that there's so much to look forward to, but I'm just seeing this, and hopefully the offseason they'll address it, and they'll make some big time splashes all throughout the offseason. And you could tell by an ownership what their sense of direction is, because in the end, it's not gonna it's not gonna make much big of the difference unless they actually do make that work. So it will be interesting to see them along the way. But unfortunately, one of our other guests couldn't be able to make it on. But hey, no worries about it. We had some great guests that were up on here on the first hour. But I do want to get into this. So the Carolina Panthers, they've hired Frank Reich as their head coach. And by the way, he was also their starting quarterback when they were in their inaugural season in Carolina. And Frank Reich, here is where you are going to see the Panthers be a much better team in just an awful division in the NFC South. Because the Panthers, what do they have right? The defense looks really good with Brian Burns, Derek Brown, and J.C. Horn. And they've also got a couple real good corners all around them. Even Jeremy Chin. So there is a promising defense with this Panthers organization. Now, the offense could really get some cleanup, but what do they have? They got Shuba Hubbard, they got Deontay Foreman, they've also got DJ Moore. Now, they have held on to DJ Moore for quite some time. Um, I thought there was going to be a plan where they were going to move him, but they were looking deep into the future and said, no, we don't want to let go of our wide receiver. We want to keep him because knowing the next quarterback that's going to come into this organization, they want to make sure that he's built right. So looking at it from the draft list, I'm going to be pulling it up right now. But the one thing that I can assure you with how this year is going to be. So the draft order from here, there's a couple spots that I'm really interested in. So we know the Bears have the number 1 pick. Right? So there's no doubt that the Bears, there's a lot of speculation as well as to what they'll pick, but I think they're definitely going to go defense. There is not a There's not a doubt in my mind. So here's where I look at this draft list. So you've got the Bears with the number 1 pick, right? And then you've also got the Texans right behind them. So there's where you look at this team. Oh, yeah. So right now, the tops, you've got the Bears, the Texans, the Cardinals, the Colts, the Seahawks, the Lions, the Raiders, and the Falcons. So let me see if they could literally give me like a draft order. Seriously. Okay, so yeah, here we are. So yeah, you got the Bears, you got the Texans, Cardinals, Colts, Seahawks, Lions, Raiders, Falcons, Panthers, and the Eagles. Those are your 10 picks. So what does Carolina need throughout the offseason? Quarterback, corner, and tight end. And the only thing is because quarterback is a massive upgrade for them. But this is why I think this is going to be important for Carolina to getting their right quarterback. Because right now, we know Baker Mayfield's out of the picture. He's completely out. Sam Darnold, he will be back for next season, but he'll be served as a bridge quarterback because I think we all are honest about Sam Darnold. We thought he was going to be at the very least a changed quarterback. Right now, he is still sticking to a lot of, the reckless play. He's been getting himself hurt and injured an awful lot. So looking at that, there's a possibility, but I think there are 2 quarterbacks that could literally work under this offense and seeing with where they sit. Now, they could potentially trade themselves up, but for how much of a bargain are they really going to throw in there for the Panthers to really get themselves up to the top 5s? Now, there are several quarterbacks that are up there, and I think because there's 4 quarterbacks this year. There's Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, and there's Anthony Richardson. Those 4, I think one of them, if we're lucky enough, because I'm not sure if all 4 quarterbacks will go in that first round. We'd be lucky enough even if there is one that carries over into the second round. But here's where I think Will Levis could work for the Carolina Panthers. Frank Reich is a quarterback whisperer. Who did he deal with? He dealt with Phillip Rivers. He dealt with Andrew Luck. He also dealt with Carson Wentz, made him 27-7 that one year before Jim Irsay just threw him out. And this is where the Colts are mistakenly making a bad decision. And the fact that Frank Reich, they fired him, they're saying, this is the report right now for the Colts, that apparently Jeff Saturday, out of all the candidates that they've interviewed, he is the hot commodity to getting the head coaching job. Are you kidding me? Like, this is part of the reason nobody wants that Colts job. And I think everybody is going to probably want to leave. It's embarrassing, and I think it's just bad. Because Jim Irsay, I mean, you want to talk about an owner that is having full control. I mean, Jerry Jones we know with all of his control, it's screwing up the Cowboys' potential. It is. And this is nothing on Mike McCarthy at all. But the fact that you love Dak, you also love Zeke, you loved Jalen Smith, you loved almost every single one of these players, and you're paying them top-notch dollars to be average players. You really think you're going to win a Super Bowl that way? And McCarthy, he's won a Super Bowl. But at the same time, at the very least, he knows how to coach. Now, there's been bad breaks with coaching scenarios. I get it. That is a part to fix up. But you can't fix Dak. You can't fix Zeke. You can't even fix, you couldn't fix Jalen Smith. That's why you shipped him out. So you could not fix a lot of these guys. And this is why that I think, Dallas, they have to really come to serious considerations that Jerry just has too much power. You've got all of his kids within the staff, Stephen Jones. So it's kind of hurting their potentials of even potentially being a Super Bowl contender. But I mean, the Colts, Jim Irsay already made that move to where he fired Frank Reich. He got Carson Wentz out of the building after he had 27 touchdowns and 7 picks. And just because that they lost to Jacksonville did not mean that was all Carson Wentz's fault. You couldn't hit past Jacksonville. And you've had a worse record for the last few years. And you're going to pin it all on Carson? Now I know, the Washington Commanders are going to do whatever it takes to really reshape themselves. I mean, whoever the quarterback will be in that building, I know a lot of people are hoping that Sam Howell will be that next potential quarterback, but Carson Wentz, he's just in such an unfortunate position in him that it's bad. I feel bad for him. But in the end, Carolina's got something really special. Frank Reich as a head coach, very offensive centric, which is exactly what this league has turned into be. What happened? The Buccaneers, they got steamrolled by Dallas in the playoffs, and Tom is already going to be headed out. So you know that Tampa, their next potential quarterback, it could be Kyle Trask, the kid from Florida. I thought Kyle Trask was a pretty good quarterback. I can't take anything of that away. So he could be something special with Tampa, but still, Tampa Bay, they're so laxed. They can't straighten themselves up. And I mean, you got to think about it. In the city of Tampa, you're having cocktail hours in the morning, and it's just very, very laxed. So you got that to deal with. Atlanta, it looks like they are very invested in Desmond Ridder. They like what they see. They saw him up in preseason. They thought he was real accurate. Some interesting. I don't know if Desmond Ridder really is the future, to be honest, but they're going to give it a shot for him for next year. Now, of course, they snuck in and got Marcus Mariota as a bridge quarterback, but it'll be interesting to see now what Desmond Ridder does. And then you got the Saints. The Saints have a great defense, but they can't figure their offense out. And Michael Thomas could be out the door. There's a lot of different changes. And Dennis Allen, we know, is a defensive coach. We're not sure that he could really work this thing. So that leaves Atlanta, Carolina, and Tampa Bay as those offensive teams. Now, I know Todd Bowles is a defensive coach, but Byron Leftwich, he got fired. I don't know where he'll end up at, next year. But Todd Bowles and Dennis Allen, those are the two defensive coaches. And then Arthur Smith and Frank Reich are offensive guys. So I feel like, and this is the thing, I'd love to touch upon for, the Falcons, because obviously Arthur Smith, he's getting another year out of himself, but he's very creative. I will say that about Arthur Smith. And I think Atlanta, they just got to figure a lot of things out. And you can't blame Arthur Smith for a lot of this stuff, because he's inheriting to where it's a complete full massive rebuild. You can't pin a lot of it on, whether Kyle Pitts really is a good draft pick or he's just a bust at tight end. Now, they did get rid of Calvin Ridley, but they got to draft the next big thing as far as wide receiver goes. Now, I know the Falcons, they're a draft ahead from the Carolina Panthers, but what do they need? They need an edge rusher, Some of them will think they need a quarterback, but I'm not sure. You might get a quarterback in the late round, or you get the top wide receiver. I think, honestly, because if you are investing in a quarterback that has some question marks, you got to get him some offense and some help. You've got to get him exactly those parts to where it supports him and it makes him a better quarterback. So, and looking at a lot of these wide receivers, I mean, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Addison, and a lot of these other real good wide receivers, they are there. So if Atlanta really wants to shift to offense and build up the defense as much as they could from whatever remaining pieces that they have, they could do that. Now, Carolina, this is where it becomes interesting. And I think they could be the team to potentially take this division next year because the defense is set. And I think they could pick up a few pieces in the draft or maybe in the offseason. Well, the offensive line, they really got to keep themselves young and they've got to reload it to where they can really shape these guys up. The run game with a run committee with Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Foreman, I think works just fine because after they traded away Christian McCaffrey, they got a bunch of good picks after that. And the only thing that they would need is a top-tier quarterback. And I feel like Will Levis could do this because watching Andrew Luck and watching Phillip Rivers and Carson Wentz, these were accurate guys. What is the question mark on Will Levis? Is he an accurate quarterback? And is he precise with his throws? We know we watched him several times with as far as him throwing the deep ball, and I think it's a beautiful deep ball he throws, but he's got to get accurate with his passes. And I think Frank Reich being that quarterback whisperer, he will make this happen. And you've got Sam Darnold as a bridge quarterback, so he's going to sit behind. This always happens with a lot of quarterbacks. They either sit for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. That's always what what rookie quarterbacks go through on, in this NFL season. They always do 6 to 8 weeks, possibly 9. And Will Levis is going to get a taste of what this offense could potentially look like when he's under center. Now, they do have DJ Moore. I think they could definitely go out and get more wide receivers because you can't not have a fully invested offense. So they might go and get themselves some big-time wide receivers or, because I know for a fact they're going to need a tight end. They have not had a producing tight end in quite some time. Now, the possibility, because in the free agent market, if they could strive for it, I think, honestly, it could be a potential where they could get Jonnu Smith or even a Hunter Henry. Somebody that's going to, at the very least, pave the way to where this offense could really produce. And because this division is awful, Carolina has an opportunity to really take this division by storm. Everybody's getting hit. Tampa Bay's getting hit. New Orleans, they got hit. And Atlanta, they're in rebuild. They're not really hitting. So they haven't even met their spot yet. So Carolina's got an opportunity to really make things happen. And I think Frank Reich, people are going to think very differently about Frank Reich at the end of the day. Because I guarantee you, if he turns around this Carolina organization where they're a playoff team and they're making some serious strides, then I think it'll be possible that the Panthers really do find themselves in that position to where they can make things happen. Because you look at all the rest of the drafts, all the rest of the drafting teams right now. We know Chicago, they're not taking a quarterback. Houston may take a quarterback. I think they might be invested in Bryce Young. The Colts, they're going to take a quarterback. I feel like that if CJ Stroud does go there, it'll be interesting to see. But Seattle and the Raiders and the Panthers are going to be the three that are going to want a quarterback. Because the Raiders, the only thing about that is they keep talking about, Tom Brady being there, or they may try to go and strive to go and get Aaron Rodgers. So there's possibilities from there for the Raiders. But then the Seahawks, are they really invested in Geno Smith? I don't know yet. So there's a possibility for what they are and how they are really going to set themselves up for this offense to really be explosive. And again, it's all going to come down to the the drafting room, and when you got Pete Carroll there, he loves a lot of his young players. So there is potential for Seattle, whether they do take a quarterback or they don't. But I think honestly, if you're Seattle, I would still get the next guy in line, but it's going to be one of those guys. Either it's going to be Anthony Richardson or maybe Will Levis. But I'm telling you right now that if Carolina literally lands the ball with Will Levis, watch out. You're going to see the NFC and you're going to see the South. It's going to look really interesting, and Carolina will be a much better team come 2023. I'd be excited for it. I think Carolina fans, they could see it, they could smell it. And I think honestly, Will Levis could very much be that developed quarterback that Frank Reich is going to be very happy to have, because he had it with Andrew Luck, and the Colts are going to regret themselves even, burying Andrew Luck the way that they did to get him to forcing retirement and firing Frank Reich on top of all of that. I think the Colts are going to regret it. All right, coming up next, because there's so much that we could really talk about from here, but the Pittsburgh Steelers, as I've said, they could very much catch a break with Kenny Pickett. And how serious are the New York Mets going into the 2023 season after Steve Cohen literally spending a lot of his money? So we're going to go into all of that here coming up next on the break. Live in Las Vegas, it's the Snake Sports Talk Show. haven't done so already, get yourselves geared up for Snake Sports Talk Show apparels. We got a lot of really, really good deals coming at you on the daily. You guys know exactly where to find them. Link is up in the description. Boy, I've been on interviews galore in the last couple of days, but I have loved every single one of them. And every one of them, too, when you see on my channel, you can catch the uploads as well for those that couldn't end up making the lives. I appreciate everybody who's jumped on in here today. Lots and lots of really good stuff. I'm really confident with my picks today. So, as I've said from yesterday when I did my prime predictions, I'm taking both the 49ers and the Bengals to cover with the possibilities of the Eagles. They win 33-31 over the 49ers. I think that's going to be a fantastic game. And Cincinnati beating Kansas City 28-27. I think it's going to be one of those really good matchups. It's going to be very, very close. But both these teams, offensive, they've literally lived up to a lot of their potentials, and there's a lot of exciting stuff for what both these teams may end up going through this year. But I'm excited for every one of them. I think they really have balanced themselves up. They worked themselves very, very well to where they are now. And it's going to be fun. So as I mentioned, we had Ingravenvids who was on here earlier talking about the Baltimore Ravens. But one of the things about the AFC North that I keep talking about is because the fact that the competition level has never, ever, ever slowed itself down. All four of these teams, we know the Bengals are in the championship game for the second straight year with Joe Burrow. And they've built a great pedigree where the offense and the defense is fantastic. And you watch for a lot of their situational play. This is why I'm like, isn't it time to give Zach Taylor a lot of this credit? I feel like that they've really worked themselves out the best way possible. The other part is that regardless of what you think with this division, Cleveland, Deshaun Watson, as I've said, I have my own personal thoughts about him as a person, but he took a year off, looked sloppy when he came back. He's going to straighten himself out throughout this season, and he's going to be a better quarterback moving in. Now, the other part is you've got Baltimore. This is why I'm like, Baltimore cannot afford to lose Lamar Jackson. You've got to get a deal done. You've got to make something happen with him because he's the only piece of this puzzle that you could literally find yourself in this position and really, really strive to, at the very least, make the offense competitive, because this is exactly what this is what this league has looked like. And look at where the division is. Zach Taylor, offensive coach. Kevin Stefanski, offensive coach. And there's only one defensive coach. That is Mike Tomlin. And then you have that special teams coach who really just makes a serious balance is John Harbaugh. So there's all sorts of that skepticism, which is rightfully so about the Ravens. I mean, you can't deny it. There's so much of that skepticism, but this is why things have got to work for the best of its potential. Now, here's what I will say, because Mike Tomlin is just that damn good situationally as a head coach. People are like, fire Tomlin, fire Tomlin. Like, why? He's never had a losing season at all in his career. Plus, he's very smart situationally. And if I'll be honest, part of this is Matt Canada has got to get that offense rolling next year. There should be zero excuses. This is why you've got to break with Kenny Pickett, because in the second half of the season, Kenny Pickett has looked comfortable throwing in the pocket. He's thrown a lot of accurate throws. He's a promising piece to what Pittsburgh should look like next season. That's why it's interesting. And even if they missed the playoffs, they didn't miss the playoffs on a bad note. They at the very least had a winning record, and without losing to where it feels like they've got to blow this thing up. The only thing you've got to work on is you've got to get offensive pieces, like as far as the offensive line. I think you could go for at least another wide receiver to get, at the very least, keep that core straightened out, because I think Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, they're going to be really good. Now, they tried to, at the very least, get a contract for Chase Claypool. Couldn't make it happen. They traded it away, and they got picks. That is totally fine with me. And you've got Pat Freiermuth, a really good tight end out of Penn State. So now you look at the offensive line, and you've got to get massive protection for Kenny Pickett to distribute the football. Plus, you got to get Najee Harris back into his groove, because he doesn't let go of the ball. He doesn't drop the ball, and he runs efficiently. This is why I'm like, yeah, this past year was a down year, but give him a healthier offensive line. I guarantee you he'll look like a completely different running back by next year. And think about it. You've got top pedigrees of running backs in this division. J.K. Dobbins, Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb. Najee Harris got to get up into that mix. And I think you'd have all four of those teams in this division where they would look superior. So I think, too, you add in a couple of defensive pieces. You might let go of some, but you may end up acquiring more picks. You can end up, acquiring a lot of those in the draft to fill in those holes. But this is why we said, if you keep defense young and have veteran pieces that could really work to where the defense works well, this is where the defense can pop. TJ Watt, very explosive. Now, I know they lost Bud Dupree, but they get Devin Bush, and they also have Minkah Fitzpatrick. There are several teams that are also added in the middle of this mix that works very, very well. And the special teams never ceases to amaze. So Pittsburgh, I think, is getting a really good, it's not a lucky break. This, I think, is a great break for them. You're not paying Kenny Pickett anything. So go and get an offensive line to protect him, get the run game going, maybe go and get a wide receiver while you're at it, and then add more defensive pieces just to, at the very least, keep that cushion to where it's young. They're explosive. Because I watched, the Cowboys with Micah Parsons. Absolutely explosive. And there's several of those pieces that they could really, really work to benefit them. So it's, as I said, I just think that Pittsburgh, with the rest of that division could be balanced. And the last thing you want to be is you want to be the fourth best quarterback in that division. So, and I don't think Kenny Pickett stands that right now, but he's not going to stand that way for very long. There is a lot of potential with what Pittsburgh can do, but the offseason and the draft, you have got to nail it. It's the same thing that I could say about the Baltimore Ravens. They have got to nail the offseason because you can't afford to let go of Lamar Jackson. If Lamar Jackson leaves, Kenny Pickett's the third best quarterback. Third one. And now I know because Deshaun Watson, with an off year that he's had, but let's be honest, we've watched him several times. He'll look like the second best quarterback. And the best is obviously Joe Burrow. So you got to make it right. You got to make it right. If you're Pittsburgh and even if you're Baltimore, you have got to make some certain moves that is going to help to benefit to get this team back on track. We know Baltimore made the playoffs, but Lamar Jackson was out and he was hurt and Tyler Huntley had to come in. So there is a lot of skepticism that's going on around the building. You can't, you cannot sweep this under the rug. So this is why you've got to fix a lot of those necessary pieces. So I do want to shift to this. I think it is interesting though. And watching the baseball season, and Connor Newcomb was really, really good with the Baltimore Orioles. I think it is exciting to see what the Orioles do with their young staff, young core. The farm system, I think, is building up to the best of its potential, but they got to fix that pitching staff. So one team in particular, and they've had a really good offseason as well. I think they nailed the offseason better than any of the teams that we saw. Excuse me for that. They nailed the draft. Well, they nailed the offseason much, much better than a lot of teams. I think the Braves had a better offseason as well, but they did trade away certain pieces. So that is going to be really interesting to see the Braves. But the Padres had an offseason. The Dodgers quietly had a little more of an offseason, but knowing Andrew Friedman, he knows how to fix up a lot of these young players to when they get promoted to the major league level, they're a lot better than people think. Now, It's the New York Mets. The Mets, we know, have Steve Cohen, and he's a very aggressive owner. We also know that he's not afraid to spend the money. Now, they go and they get themselves big-time potentials. They got Justin Verlander. At the very least, he's right there back reunited with Max Scherzer. Hopefully, this pitching staff really does work well. Plus, you got several other pieces that are right there along those lines. You got Brandon Nimmo, who's on a contract extension. Jeff McNeil got himself a contract extension. Now, Dominic Smith is out of the building, but they've got to get themselves somewhere, at least with first base and third base, because that is ultimately those positions the Mets know they have to fix up. That's why, because of the Carlos Correa situation, I mean, that was just absolutely nuts. And we thought that if Correa was there with the Mets, he would have been a third baseman, left Lindor at short, you would have had McNeil, and then, of course, you would have had anybody that could play first base. So now the other part is you got Francisco Alvarez, one of their top catchers. They know he's going to be coming up. He's going to be electrifying, and he's really going to help this lineup. Now, the expectation for the Mets is this. You can't afford to go into the postseason and then just get swept, because then that just becomes really embarrassing. Now, Buck Showalter, he's a smart manager. He's going to figure out a way to get the Mets to where they could get back up on track. They could pick up where they left off of from last year, and then they could possibly be that explosive team in the NL East. Now, the Phillies made it to the World Series. The Braves, they won the World Series a year before. And now the Mets really got to push their competition, because the only two, the Nationals and the Marlins, I don't really see them going anywhere at this point. I think they're really reshaping and they're really trying to redevelop their staff. But the only three, the Phillies, the Mets, and the Braves, are the only three teams in the NL East that can draw competition. So out of those three, this is why that the Mets, I don't know how serious that they can be, but it looks a lot like they've addressed a lot of their problems. Steve Cohen was not afraid to spend the money, because it's such a system where there's no salary cap. You're basically spending money to the nine. That's why the Yankees, they were going to pay whatever it took for Aaron Judge to stay with the Yankees. But what the Mets are concerned, they want to be the more competitive team in the National League. There's no doubt about that. So Steve Cohen was going to pay whatever it took to get superstar players, to get these guys all the way around, all across the diamond, and in the pitching rotation to the bullpen, and make it better. Because ultimately, now they did re-sign Edwin Diaz. They know they got their closer. He's gotten much, much better since he joined in on this clubhouse. So the Mets, they look to be serious. But I'll guarantee you, now, I know the Braves, they're going to be feeling a little bit because of the fact of there's no Dansby Swanson in the middle of this thing. So now they got Vaughn Grissom as their shortstop. So it will be interesting to see how Grissom really, how he really shapes up for this Braves team, because they're really good all around. Austin Riley, Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna, Matt Olson. They now have acquired Sean Murphy from the A's, who I think is a really good defensive catcher. The stick could use some help, but I think they'll work on it. But they also got several other pieces that they could really, really invest in. Because remember, they got rid of Christian Pache, and they got rid of a couple of their young stars, but they didn't get rid of all of what their farm system is. That's why John Hart is such a really good general manager. That's why winning the World Series the year before the Astros won this past year, the Braves were just smart. And even if they got dealt with the harder cards, it didn't matter to them. They were able to build up a lot of their young prospects, and they built them to where this is set. Now they got Michael Harris for a long time, Austin Riley for a long time, Ozzie Albies and Ronald Acuna and Matt Olson. So the only player that I think, is just going to be used as a rental is definitely Sean Murphy, because it's either he really does play defensively, because you got to think, you were coming off a year where you had William Contreras. So you got to fit that hole. And then the pitching staff from Spencer Strider to Max Fried to several others, this is just a dangerous team. Now, we know they got eliminated in the postseason, but it left it honestly left a sour taste in their mouth to where they want to be back into the postseason again, and they really want to wreak havoc on a lot of these NL teams. Now, the Phillies have been cleaning up their act, but there's several reasons to where they need to not put Kyle Schwarber in that lead-off position. I am serious. I have been screaming about this for the last few months because he's not a leadoff hitter. Now, what do? They go and spend big money to go and get Trey Turner. He's now their big-time leadoff hitter. You go and put either Rhys Hoskins or Nick Castellanos in the second hole. Then you've got Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, and you have the fifth spot where it's either going to be Schwarber or it's going to be Castellanos. It's that simple. It's not rocket science at all. So you are really paying for a lot of these guys to where they could be very, very talented guys. And it's moving Bryson Stott out of short to second. So it'll make sense to where the offense is balanced and defensively they could really work. So, and by the way, their pitching staff got a lot better. They've gotten a lot of real good pieces. Finally, Dave Dombrowski's doing the right thing. But that's why I said, I think this year, Phillies, Mets, and Braves, they're going to be very competitive in that division. Nationals and the Marlins, give me a break. They're already in rebuild mode. They're not going to be going anywhere. And I don't see them making massive, massive leaps. So I'm telling you, I just don't think that catching the attention and catching the eye of what these teams are really shaping and what they're going to do for what the 2023 season is going to look like for all these baseball teams. But I think the NL East is going to be fun to watch. The Central, there has been multiple moves there. The Cubs want to be competitive, and I think they picked up a bunch of pieces to where they could try to keep up with either the Brewers and Cardinals. But we all know that division has always been wide open for the last few years. Whether it's been the Cardinals, the Cubs, the Brewers, either of those teams that have really made a jump. But the NL West, we know that the Padres are trying to shoot for that division against the Dodgers, and you also have the Giants. You can't really leave out in that position. Rockies and Diamondbacks, they're nowhere to be found. Nowhere. So, however you expect with the National League, it'll be a lot of fun. I do think that the competitive division is going to be the NL East because the West, Padres, Dodgers, maybe the only two, possibly the Giants as a third, but the division's wide open for the Central. I don't really see too, though, that the Pirates or the Reds really making those jumps. Now, the Pirates did bring back Andrew McCutchen, but it's not going to make massive difference. I think it's ultimately going to be shaping those young guys that are going to be there. So, I mean, the Mets, they got to be serious. If you are shooting for a World Series title, because they had not been back in the World Series since 2015 against the Royals, and you got to think about how explosive that team was. That team was built on trust. They also got a lot of their veterans back. Like David Wright was out for a long time. He comes back into the lineup and he gets better. Then there's Yoenis Cespedes they traded for, and he was on a hot streak. Then Daniel Murphy starts to catch up quick. So, and by the way, their pitching staff was really, really something else. I mean, Jacob deGrom, Matt Harvey, Steven Matz, and Noah Syndergaard. That was a hell of a rotation. Now the rotation's broken up. So you got to think, though, because with the Mets and how that they play out, they could either be a very good team or they could look completely mediocre. But I think because of where it left off last year, they got a sour taste in their mouth, losing to losing their postseason matchup. But I think this year They look really, really serious. They look very interesting. And I think the Mets, I don't know if they'll run with the division, but it's a three it's a three-team race in this division. Braves, Mets, and Phillies. I think it'll be fun to watch them all the way through. So, while we got at least a couple minutes up on our hands, um, so there is a few possibilities as far as um, so there's a couple teams we're going into the trade deadline soon. So it's All-Star break that's going to be coming into for hockey, and it's close. So there are several teams that could be literally looking into either buyers or sellers. So we'll definitely start up with who's going to be the buyers, who are going to be the sellers, and how exactly that this team now are going to shape up after everything. Because right now, this has not been a really good out here in Vegas. It has not been a great stretch for the Golden Knights. They are literally on a 4-game losing streak. This does not look good. They took a double whammy against the Rangers and the Islanders. So now you've really, really got to get serious. So let's go ahead and let's start with buyers and sellers for a bunch of these teams. So we'll look up at it a couple here. All right. So looking at buyers and sellers all throughout the standings. So let's look at the Seattle Kraken. They buyers or sellers? I honestly think that the Kraken are potential buyers. The reason that I say that is because, first of all, this offense is really, really good. With Jordan Eberle, Matt Beniers, by the way, oh yeah, he's here. He's been showing up in the big way possible for Seattle. And by the way, their goaltending has been really, really good. And right now, they're first in the Pacific Division. I don't know if they will stand there for very long, but they've played very exceptional. They're catching them to where the Golden Knights are on a bad drift. They are on a bad drift right now. And Seattle, they're going to be looking to add some pieces. They may add in some defensive pieces, or they might go offensive. But all I know is that Seattle looked for them to be buyers during the trade deadline. Dallas Stars, buyers or sellers? I think Dallas could be on the buying trend because, first of all, Jake Oettinger, very competitive goaltender. He's been looking really, really good for the Stars this year, and they're leading that division because right now they already got 66 points, and Pete DeBoer, say what you want to about him. He is not a terrible head coach. He really has shaped up a lot of really good defensive teams, and this is a good defensive team. Jason Robertson, MVP year he's looking at right now for the Stars, and he's looked really, really something else. But it is clear, though, that the Stars, they're going to be competitive. They want to keep driving that division in the Central. And I think they're going to definitely upgrade a lot of pieces. I think they might end up looking more towards on offense to, at the very least, surplus what they're looking for. Because defensively, they've been real good. They have been really, really good. There's been there has been no sign to where the Stars have literally lost a beat on defense. The St. Louis Blues, buyers or sellers? I'm going to say the St. Louis Blues are going to be sellers because, first of all, they have had a lot of talk right now with Ryan O'Reilly. Right now is the big fish where everybody is trying to, inquire and call about him. But St. Louis does not look like the same team that won the Stanley Cup. They have people are saying, Jordan Binnington, he's been kind of in over his skis in the last few years. He's not looked like himself, and St. Louis is just kind of I'm not saying Jordan Binnington is a bad goaltender, but I do think there is a lot of reshaping that has to be done in this organization because, first of all, you've got Ryan O'Reilly, who's going to be a big commodity. Vladimir Tarasenko, what are you doing with this position? Because right now, they spent a ton of money. They got Torrey Krug. They got several other pieces.
So it doesn't look like that there is certain pieces that is working to their potential. So I think St. Louis is definitely sellers. The Nashville Predators, buyers or sellers? I'm going to say they're buyers. Because the only thing about them is Yusei Saros, very good at goaltending. And I knew that coming out the gate with him and Ekarinne. But Nashville's really is that kind of in-between team. But they're needing to get a massive jump. Now, Colton Sissons and Matt Duchene and Philip Forsberg, those are going to be the top guys. Now, remember, they did lose Victor Arvidsson to the LA Kings. Why? Because the Kings needed offense. So I think they'll be buyers. They're going to look to go on offense, and they really are going to look to try to shape themselves up to where they can be very, very competitive in the playoffs. Colorado Avalanche, buyers or sellers? I'm going to put them on hold. Reason I say that is because I don't think they're in a position to buy or sell. Injuries have been an unfortunate position with Colorado, but they are in the wild card. So they are maintaining themselves for as long as they possibly can. But I don't think that they're going to be buying or selling. I think they're going to stay put. And then finally, the Vancouver Canucks. This is all in the Western Conference. Buyers or sellers? They are clearly sellers. Vancouver is just ready to tear this thing apart. Bo Horvat is a big-time hit. JT Miller maybe end up being on the move, but they are trying to, at the very least, keep their core piece like Elias Pettersson and several other pieces. But I knew that this was not working by the time that Jacob Markstrom left this organization, and the goaltending, they've been giving up a ton. They've been giving up a ton of different goals, shots on goals, and this has not looked good for Vancouver. I see them being sellers. So the potential buyers I see is the Seattle Kraken, the Dallas Stars, the Nashville Predators, and sellers will possibly be Vancouver and St. Louis without a doubt. And as far as Colorado goes, they're going to be hold. Like, they're going to be on hold. They are not going to get rid of a lot of their young pieces. They're not even going to get rid of a lot of their veteran pieces. So I don't want to hear that. I think, honestly, they're going to hold on to their core, and they just have to hope that a lot of these pieces, they're going to be healthy enough to where they can play well, and they're going to get back into being a tough competitive team. So, all right, folks, that's going to do it for me here on the Snake Sports Talk Show. I appreciate everybody who has jumped on. Thanking Ingraven from Ingravenvids being on with us, Connor Newcomb from Locked On Orioles. Lots and lots of great content creators for all their respective teams. What a great 2 hours that it has been. I appreciate every single one of you guys who have been joining in and hanging out with me all throughout it. Shout out to everybody: Tristan Long, King Blaze, Keentown Breakdown, B.Al., Cam, Key in the building, Jason, Heather in Kansas, Hitchkovsky, and of course, Fish and Football. I appreciate all of you guys for joining us here today. What a stacked show it was. I appreciate everybody for being here. Continue to like, follow, subscribe, share, and hit the bell button for all the latest notifications of the Snakes Sports Talk Show. You don't want to miss it. We are in interviews galore, and there are so many other interviews to catch up on. But you don't want to miss it in the next episode of the Snakes Sports Talk Show. Have a great rest of your weekend. Enjoy championship weekend. Chiefs, Bengals, 49ers, Eagles. Let's see who are victorious to get to the road to Super Bowl 57. Take care, you guys. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.